The battle against wokeness has been raging for longer than most of us realize. It's not only engulfed video games, but completely changed how many different institutions work, from schools all the way up to government. As you all know, Trump won, and things have been changing. And now there's this story that is pretty much, I would consider, to be one of the biggest stories right now when it comes to not just entertainment, but everything, to be honest. So, let's talk about how the US government quite literally banged the opposition against things like Gamergate 1 and 2 and plenty of other things. Also, footage-wise, not much makes sense here, so I'm mostly just gonna be playing dope gameplay from games I like here and there. Cool? Alright, let me just talk and show you lots of examples. So this all stems from USAID, which stands for the US Agency of International Development. I'll be calling it USAID for the rest of this video, if you don't mind, as stated here via Fox News. On his first day back in office, Trump issued an executive order halting most foreign aid actions, asserting that the United States foreign aid industry and bureaucracy are not aligned with American interests and in many cases antithetical to American values. 2 weeks later, he blasted the agency for being run by radical lunatics. A part of these discoveries by Trump's administration, they discovered that this organization was actually funding misinformation campaigns across the entirety of American culture and beyond. We're talking movies, games, TV, ad placements, books, schools, pretty much everything. Ironically, USAID was originally founded in 1961 for the sole reason of countering communism propaganda that was targeting the American people in hopes of destroying the American culture. And now, the very same organization was instead funding the very communism that it was built to defeat in taking over America and its allies completely. Wokeness, as it turns out, was never just some random thing that just rised out of nowhere. It was actually, like I have predicted and have been covering for years now, a calculated attack to destabilize and destroy first world countries to usher in new ideologies and demographics. As we all know, there was a shift somewhere in the 2010s when content like video games especially went from being great to suddenly pushing narratives within these games. Sure, there was politics in games still, but mostly the political themes were usually tied to their unique worlds and concepts. For an example, The Witcher 3. That has political themes since Geralt does deal with kings and other lords of certain lands in places like Skellige. But these are not political in the sense that they are talking down to you, the player. They are simply presenting the political climate of their world within their games under their own rules and traditions. That's totally fine. But this is a stark contrast to, say, the many games that released in 2020 and beyond that specifically targeted and tried to ruin established white characters, for example, and destroy franchises and degrade the male archetype specifically. A good example of this, Suicide Squad, where every single villain is a man, every white man is definitely a bad guy pretty much, and the only good Justice League member is, unsurprisingly, Wonder Woman. While I can't confirm yet if Sweet Baby was and somehow tied to this USAID fund thing at this point, I really wouldn't be surprised. But what Trump has done here in one fell swoop, as I will show you plenty of examples from all over, he has effectively cut off the money from these organizations and operations completely. By the way, over 10,000 employees of USAID were fired effective immediately following this executive order. This order will cut and destroy any contract that is being determined as a threat against American democracy and free speech in any way. So what does this mean for wokeness, you may be asking? It's simple. These programs and things like pushing transgenderism in schools, for example, these are all politically motivated ideologies that were pushed and tied to USAID. You ever wonder why so many of these websites like Kotaku and others could afford for years to push out absolute slop and then attack their player bases despite their websites having horrible retention numbers and bad viewerships and subscriber counts too? How could Kotaku, Vice, and specifically political content creators all be able to push their pro-communism, anti-conservative content all day, every day pretty much, despite not really making a profit from it? The answer is what is going on here. Let me explain. We have the one content creator. His name is Vosh. I don't like this guy. He's a weirdo that has tried for years to push the idea that the age of consent should be lowered, which is, yeah, very weird, but he does do that. He was also seen on stream recently. Here's a screenshot of him where as soon as USAID was cancelled effectively immediately, Vosh's entire personality and the smugness that he usually has, it suddenly evaporated out of nowhere. He was now pleading for people to donate to him to subscribe and to give him any amount of money they could, otherwise he wouldn't be able to push or talk about the things that he speaks about, which are usually left-wing communism-focused talking points. Here's a clip of him saying stuff. Hopefully I can keep this clip in unless he copyrights the video, so if this part of the video doesn't exist in the future, my bad, but here's the clip for now.
For being a bit self-centered for a moment. I'm sorry, I apologize. I know. They say privileged streamer. My job could go out like that. You know how crazy things are getting over here? Literally, like, at any moment. You know that? They could just say, hey, YouTube, it's un-American of you to allow left-leaning people to, post videos. These communist videos are pro-China. Kablamo, I'm out. And that's a little scary. It's literally, like, there's no, like, it's a day-by-day thing. I wake up every morning and I check. So, I'm just saying, in the meantime, maybe I'm a little bit more like and subscribe-y than usual. You have a backup platform you're planning to go to if shit hits the fan? Yeah, there's a corner under, like, right next to the 5 in downtown Seattle that I don't usually see other people panhandling on.
Isn't it interesting how Vosh, who's usually very smug about these sorts of things, is suddenly completely a different person the moment that USAID shuts down? And now he claims that he's worried that the government will not allow him or others to push leftist or pro-communism content in the future. But of course, people like him were totally fine with crapping all over conservatives or really anyone who went against his talking points for years. And people like Vosh routinely called to deplatform, censor, or ban anyone who disagreed with his pro-communist liberal beliefs. But now that the shoe has dropped and these payments are no longer going to many of these causes, as I'll show you proof of in just in a second, he's now coincidentally very worried about losing money and needing support from his fan base. The very same fan base that he cultivated for years that have been brainwashed by people like him into becoming communists. Which, if you don't know, is an ideology that is intrinsically designed so nobody has any money and everybody is considered the same, so to speak, in every single way. Imagine fostering a community that pushed the idea that you should all be broke and miserable 24/7 and then turning around and suddenly asking that same demographic that you created to now give you money to survive when you've pushed for years that governments need to implement concepts like UBI, or Universal Basic Income. This guy just wants everyone to sit around and do nothing 24/7 while having all their needs met so they can just sit around online all day parroting his talking points. But as soon as money runs out from USAID, suddenly making a profit from your content is now an issue? Funny how that works. Even Hassan Piker, the guy who is pretty much just pushing terrorism on Twitch, has been chronicled to be saying such things as seen here. Hassan was crashing out, claiming people don't want to see his streams. His community used to be cool, and he hates what his community has now become. All of this coming out around the same time this infinite money glitch, so to speak, evaporates overnight. But I hear you say, how can you prove that USAID paid for left-wing content creators to bash things like Gamergate and so on? Well, here we have the BBC. No, not that BBC. The British Broadcast Corporation issuing their official statement when it comes to USAID being cancelled worldwide. A free press is essential to freedom and democracy, and 75% of countries around the world do not have a free press. BBC Media Action supports local media around the world to deliver trusted information to people most in need. Like many international development organizations, BBC Media Action has been affected by the temporary pause in US government funding, which amounts to about 8% of our income in 23-24. We're doing everything we can to minimize the impact on our partners and the people we serve. As the BBC's international charity, we are completely separate from BBC News and wholly reliant on our donors and supporters to carry out our work. So interesting how places like the BBC is suddenly worried about losing money and having to make actual profits the moment that USAID is cancelled. But suddenly you start to realize that all of these TV shows and propaganda made by the BBC are funded in some way by them, where they replaced real-life historical figures who were white with black women, for example, instead. It starts to make a lot of sense. This was all a targeted movement, an attack on the tangible reality of what we all knew was objectively true. But the misinformation machine was working tirelessly to gaslight you into believing that none of this is true. For an example, in 2019, a mini-documentary series called The First Swede sparked criticism as the government over there tried to convince people worldwide that the first Swedish people were in fact black people with blue eyes. That was funded by their government, which I have no doubt was in some way tied to the funding that came from places like America, as justthenews.com reported following this freezing of funds worldwide. One of these programs that lost funding was, and no, I'm not kidding, Biden administration spent $15 million in taxpayer funds to distribute condoms in Afghanistan. I kid you not, one of USAID's care packages was to push safe sex in Afghanistan, apparently of all places. Another program that lost funding was Trump Foreign Aid freezes pull over $1 million in funding for LGBT programs in Ireland and Serbia. So LGBTQ+ groups in places well away from the American people relied on funding, if you can believe it, from America to fund their LGBTQ+ efforts. Why was America funding things like this? Why were people's tax dollars going towards stuff like condoms of all things for Afghanistan people? Especially when you consider whenever a hurricane hits America's coast, the then liberal government just closed their eyes and said, sorry, you're on your own. Remember the Los Angeles fires? The Biden administration was only willing to give people affected by those fires $770 per person. But they were willing to give $15 million to Afghanistan for condoms. Like, this is real, man, I'm not lying. I'll give you two more before I move on to the whole Gamergate thing. So here we have also that USAID was able to send funds to the George Soros Foundation before it got shut down for things like drag queens and LGBTQ+ agendas in the future. And then, for an example, we have the University of North Carolina, which was given $7.7 million for, and again, I'm being totally serious here, our integrated set of 4 research projects seek to understand the impact of regulations and communication campaigns on those disadvantaged by tobacco use disparities, including Black, lower socioeconomic status, and lesbian, gay, or bisexual populations. Yeah, they were given almost $8 million to study how cigarettes affected Black and gay people differently than other groups. And American taxpayer dollars were funding this, by the way. This is where your taxes were going. They were going to slop like this. Then you have the US Secretary, who even said publicly that they discovered that stuff like transgender comic books in Peru were getting upwards of $32,000 from USAID to produce and push that propaganda in that country as well. And don't forget how people like Ben Stiller, a Hollywood actor, was revealed to have been paid $4 million by USAID to just take photos with Zelensky during the whole Ukraine war debacle to make his public persona seem more welcoming, and no, I'm not kidding. So as you can see, I've offered you plenty of examples, but the slop doesn't stop there, fellas, we're just getting started. This brings me to the whole Gamergate bombshell, the website Politico. They have been ousted by the US Secretary publicly as well for getting funded to pay for their subscriptions to bash online movements like Gamergate specifically for years. Here's Caroline Leavitt, the US Secretary, publicly calling out Politico.com, and here, just watch this.
Upon coming out here to the briefing room, I was made aware of the funding from USAID to media outlets, including Politico, who I know has a seat in this room. And I can confirm that the more than $8 million taxpayer dollars that have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico on the American taxpayers' dime will no longer be happening. The Doge team is working on canceling those payments now. Again, this is a whole of government effort to ensure that we are going line by line when it comes to the federal government's books. And this president and his team are making decisions across the board on, do these receipts serve the interests of the American people? Is this a good use of the American taxpayers' money? If it is not, that funding will no longer be sent abroad, and American taxpayers will see significant savings because of that effort.
So she confirms at the White House that Politico received over $8 million in funding to attack and destroy concepts like Gamergate for years. As we can see here, Politico received $8.1 million in funding from taxpayers by USAID over a combined total of 236 transactions over the years. As Grumps pointed out, you simply need to search up Gamergate on Politico's site to see how broadly they have been attacking and generalizing and connecting Gamergate to so many other stories. Politico tried to smear Gamergate and claimed that it had a hand in controversies surrounding people like Taylor Swift and the harassment of her fans. And they painted the movement as a right-wing extremist group that hates women and wants them dead. Going further, Politico tried to tie Gamergate to stuff like Watergate of all things and say Republicans are evil people. Here they try to say that Gamergate was destroyed for sure, and this was in 2017. Spoilers, it wasn't. And here you can see that Gamergate was also being targeted as a harassment campaign against transgender bathroom guidelines of all things. Politico even tried to tie Brianna Wu, who was against Gamergate, into concepts like Trump's inauguration day and more. Are you seeing all of this? All calculated attacks against players, not to mention the historical accuracy and context surrounding many different countries and more, as I already showed you. All of these things are tied together by the single thread that encompasses them all, which is USAID. All of these websites, bloggers, and pro-woke yes men were never afraid of your attacks because your boycotts could never hurt them because of things like the USAID. So what if you boycott some website that pushes anti-Gamergate talking points? It didn't matter really, because they were being kept afloat by the very same tax dollars that many Americans paid without them even knowing it, effectively creating a self-fulfilling loop of infinite money that allowed these grifters and hate smear campaigns to exist for well over a decade and then some. Here we have a breakdown of where the money Politico was given by USAID being funneled into very different parts of their organization. $1.3 million was given to the Department of Health and Human Services, another $1.3 million for the Department of the Interior, $1.29 million for Department of Energy. And where does all this money come from? Right down here in the bottom right. Yeah, it's all from American taxpayers without them even realizing it. The very disinformation machine that me and others have been fighting against for years, that I have been telling you it's all fake and trying to destroy video games and all pop culture pretty much. It was all being combated and deflected by organizations that were funded by the very money of the people that they were tasked with attacking. Like I may title this video, this is the worst woke scandal yet. This is easily one of the biggest stories of the year, and I need people to grasp how all-encompassing this really is. Here's just some of what Politico has said about Gamergate. The status handoff of Washington's most famous gamer from a libertarian-leaning white man to two millennial socialist women of color is in some ways the perfect summation of how video games have changed in recent years. Video games were never really the exclusive province of white male loners, but that's been the stereotype, and some players took that reputation seriously. So much so that they organized a backlash to try to protect it. 6 years ago, a disinformation campaign with the profoundly stupid name of Gamergate spent several months orchestrating a series of harassment campaigns of women game developers and critics. Several women fled their homes in fear of their safety, the harassers' motivation to drive people they dubbed social justice warriors for their progressive values and their desire to see more realistic depictions of women and minorities in video games out of the industry. The campaign worked well enough that Steve Bannon, as reported in Joshua Green's Devil's campaign, used it as a template for Trump's presidential campaign. But Gamergate also prompted a backlash to the backlash. It didn't stop the thing it set out to stop. Chris Plant, the editor-in-chief of Polygon, said to me today of Gamergate, if anything, it made it go faster, and so in 2020, no one is surprised that two 30-something progressive women play video games. Games have always been big and diverse, as disparate as TV and books and movies. They are played and made by people who just want to zone out with some dumb entertainment, and by people who want to expand their horizon with something strange and sublime. No one person represents them. Video games don't belong to a 31-year-old Novorkian woman any more than they belong to reactionary Reddit trolls. The fact they even state that they spoke to Polygon about this, a gaming website that has also been very vocally against Gamergate as well, it speaks volumes. They even say in there that if you missed it, that Gamergate is what led to Trump winning the election. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here, fellas? This is scathing for left-wing pro-woke gaming news outlets. They are all in bed with one another, being funded by the government, or I guess they were, they aren't anymore as far as we can tell, to destroy and devalue the players' opinions, feelings, and actions by brushing them off as right-wing extremism. You hate feminism? It's cause you're an incel. You don't like LGBTQ plus stuff being forced down your throat all the time? What are you, a terrorist? This is why they were so smug about these things for so long. They were quite literally undefeatable as long as the paychecks kept rolling in. The misinformation machine could just keep spreading its lies. And oh boy, as I was making this, more stuff came out. Take my hand, dear viewer. No, not that one, my other one. There you go. And let's just keep going down the rabbit hole. So WikiLeaks, of all things, has now brought up even more information about all of this too. As they state, the same funds that have been attacking Gamergate have also been funding wars, fellas. Here's part of what WikiLeaks just leaked. According to a USAID fact sheet, which has since been taken offline in 2023, the agency funding training and support for 6,200 journalists assisted 707 non-state news outlets and supported 279 media sector civil society organizations dedicated to strengthening independent media. The 2025 foreign aid budget included $268,376,000 allocated by. Blah, blah, blah. My tongue is tired. Let's keep going. 268 million schmeckles were spent on this one thing. Jesus, and it keeps going. All over the world, media outlets and organizations have had to halt some of their activities overnight. We have articles scheduled until the end of January, but after that, if we haven't found solutions, we won't be able to publish anymore, explains a journalist. So all of this liberal propaganda that has been suffocating the entire world for years was being funded by the US government, specifically when people like Obama or Biden were empowered to reduce, remove, and destroy free speech specifically and censor the voices of specifically right-wing and Gamergate supporters. And it spread so far that we got condoms in Afghanistan, DEI programs in places like Ireland and Serbia, and the gays got $8 million to find out if cigarettes affected them differently. Spoiler alert, they didn't, by the way. And now you're telling me that almost $300 million was given to Ukraine to spew propaganda as well, and the moment that USAID is cut off, then 9 out of 10 of their news sites suddenly can't support themselves or push said news stories or propaganda anymore, almost as if it was all a ruse created to push false narratives to control the flow of information. Then you got Anita Sarkeesian, the harbinger of why your video games have sucked ass for a while now. Remember her and her feminist frequency platform that pretty much died? What if I told you that she got grants too? Feminist Frequency was given over $200,000 in 2023 alone, although it has yet to be proven if this is connected to US aid or not. But people were able to also find Anita's 2022 financials, where the closing balance for Feminist Frequency was $451,000. That's a lot of money given to you, and as we can see up here in 2022, $246,000 of that was from corporate funding, so companies gave Anita that money to push her pro-feminist agenda in games. $169,000 was from individual people, and another $126,000 was given by grants. Again, right now I can't confirm yet if it's USAID or not, but I really wouldn't be surprised. In total, the revenue given by all of these groups to Feminist Frequency in 2022 alone was $569,538.40. That's a lot of money to be thrown into the void of uselessness that gamers don't even listen to, but as you can see, dear viewer, the rot is deep with this one. It goes beyond video games, it hits everything, all of it is connected. I have been called a liar, a grifter, a snake for stating that pro-feminism wokeness has been destroying video games for years, only to find out that the very people calling me a grifter have been grifting off American taxpayer money for years, now combating me. And hey gaming websites, how does it feel to know that I beat you guys in the end? I run a one-man operation over here on my dinky little MacBook using iMovie with footage that I pretty much gained from my PS5 that I get when I play on my couch where I write these videos. How does it feel knowing that a guy who never went to school for journalism out-journalismed you at your own jobs? You're all liars, you peddle for freakish causes, and try to ruin my favorite pastime. And now instead of gaining platinum trophies, I spend more of my time yelling at you freaks for trying to make everything lame and stupid for my favorite hobby. But you can only really blame yourselves, and I'm glad that all of this rot is being flushed out. Maybe one day I can just become a full-time streamer and just play video games that I love all day when the rot has been successfully destroyed for good. Then I can finally rest. But until then, I will continue to expose these lies, and I hope you found some informative value in this video. I need more people to become aware of this, and you can bet both your butt cheeks I will keep my ears to the ground to ensure that I stay on top of this story. Thank you for watching, subscribe to keep up to date, and unlike Anita Sarkeesian, I am not in fact funded by USAID. But hell, I wish I was getting paid $500,000 a year to do this. I could then maybe afford an editor more often if I did. Alright, I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.